Hey everyone, all you wrestlers out there. We are the Samurai Brothers Wrestling Channel. My name is John. I'm here with my brother Matthew, and this is our inaugural episode. We're trying to do a podcast just to kind of give insight to everyone about the sport of wrestling, and we'll be covering a variety of topics going forward. Wrestling, obviously, and that can pertain to wrestling in the United States at the high school level, the collegiate level, and then if you go to other levels such as international, and we'll be hoping to cover that style too, even outside of the U.S. Obviously to the uh, World Tournament, World's Championships. We also have some connections to Japan, so I'll be covering that as well. And then Matthew he also writes for MMA Freak, which is a website that does cover the MMA scene. And I like to do sumo wrestling related things. So we'll be trying to go with that as we go along. Matthew, thanks for taking the time today, and hoping that we'll have a great first episode.
Yep, certainly hoping that.
So I want to go ahead and get started. Obviously, this weekend, around the country, we're starting to get into that March Madness time frame for pretty much all sports, whether it's high school or college. And this weekend, aside from California, I think most of the states seem to be having their state title tournaments. But for California specifically, this is the weekend before the state championship. And usually what ends up happening is we have what's called the league tournaments, which is kind of the first step to getting into the postseason. Then we have the CIF divisionals, and then the Masters tournament, which happened this weekend. And to place there, then you go to state. So that's the ultimate one to get into that. So I think just want to cover most of the big sectional tournaments that happened this weekend. Obviously, it would have been everyone, but the ones that are really our main focus, we'll go ahead and go about that. So hoping that you'll be able to provide some great insight as to what we have. So I want to go over first, and I'll go ahead and screen share this just to see what we have here, if you don't mind. So I'll show the stats I got. Mainly, we'll go over this one first, which was the CIF Masters in the Southern section. So what we found here is that we have Temecula Valley won the Southern section for the Masters tournament this year, which is, to me, I believe that's probably the first time in a long time that I've seen that they've been that competitive. I know that, and just a disclaimer, I do officiate high school wrestling myself, and I just so happen to be at that tournament that had the Temecula Valley team divisionals, and I know that they ended up qualifying 12 to the Masters tournament. And in the end, they ended up winning, and it actually was really close because they only ended up winning by 4 points. If you see here, Palm Desert, even though they only qualified 8 wrestlers to state, they had 6 winners. And they were your second place for CIF Masters in the Southern section. And then the third place went to Calvary Chapel, who we both know had a successful run in the early 90s, and they've been a consistent competitor within the Southern section. So Matthew, just kind of give us a breakdown what you think about how, that these teams, Temecula Valley winning the Southern section, followed by Palm Desert, give us your thoughts on what you think about that this is kind of a turnaround compared to recent years that we've seen.
Well, this is kind of interesting because I don't ever recall there being a time where Temecula Valley was like ruling the Southern section. They've always done well. They've always been consistent. They've always won CIF divisional championships. They've won dual meet championships, and they've done very well on kind of like the lower to middle tier levels, but I don't recall them ever being this competitive to the point where they could theoretically compete for state with that many wrestlers. So this is kind of a new thing, and it's interesting that they would be able to pull that off. Palm Desert is also a new name because you don't typically see them in terms of the top level schools when it comes to the CIF Master Tournament. Other schools are obviously very familiar. Calvary Chapel, even though their heyday was in the late 90s, early 2000s, they've always been consistent. They've always been in there. St. John Bosco, Fountain Valley, Northview, even Esperanza, they're all very familiar names. But here we have Temecula Valley, who, though they've been a familiar name, have not always been in contention. But here they are winning the Southern Section Masters Tournament, qualifying 11 for state. We could theoretically see them have a historic run here, if not for the state tournament, definitely for their school history. So it's definitely going to be interesting. And also, like I said, Palm Desert's not really a name you think of when you think of the Southern Section Master Tournament either. But here these two schools are. Like I said, Temecula Valley has been consistent in terms of actually being there. They've consistently sent people to state. They've consistently performed very well. But seeing them actually be in a place where they could possibly contend is very interesting. And one also has to remember that when you're talking about the Southern Section Master Tournament, you're talking about the largest section in the state. Even though most of the state championships, at least in the modern era, have come from the central section, which we'll get to, the southern section is the largest, and you do still see some competitive schools coming out of there. So, but we haven't seen a southern section state championship since Calvary Chapel. So we might be seeing a southern section revival. Hard to tell, but we'll see how state goes next weekend.
So I just want to point out to certain people, if they watch this video and just kind of comment on where have these guys been? Have they even been following the season? So just an FYI, we're just trying to see how things are out there. So apologize if we might have missed some details. So I am looking at the current state rankings for the high schools this year. And at number 1 right now, they do have Buchanan. And then number 2 is Poway. But we are seeing right here, number 3, Palm Desert, number 4, Temecula Valley. So these schools are making a rise here. But I do want to point out that these schools, neither of these schools, it looks like, aside from, so in the 2020 tournament, now you got to remember that 2021 was canceled due to the COVID pandemic, although there was an invitational tournament that was put together by volunteers. And, I'm not going to discount, the accomplishments that the wrestlers put in who participated in that tournament. Although, because it was not a CIF sanctioned event, we have to reference then the 2020 tournament and the results from there. Now, I am saying that Palm Desert did end up placing 17th at the 2020 tournament, but, I'm looking that Temecula Valley is nowhere to be seen in those top 20 rankings. So I think the biggest surprise out of, any of these schools that are probably going to be showing up to this year's tournament, the biggest surprise is going to be Temecula Valley. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Well, another thing we have to look at is the broad scope of what the pandemic ultimately, the consequences that ended up having. Because you would think that there were a lot of negative consequences that we saw. Like if we want to go to the college level, some programs went belly up, which has been an ongoing issue. But what we didn't see was how things might be affected, not just in terms of the negative way for high schools, but in a positive way. What we may not have predicted was the fact that this would have given some of the high schools maybe a chance to rebuild in a unique way that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. That's probably why here we have Temecula Valley and Palm Desert. Because what else are these guys going to do now? Officially, they weren't supposed to be competing and stuff like that. But of course, like even at the club level. But of course, you and I knowing how things work, obviously there's ways to get around that in a certain way. So we can only assume that these schools were still in a rebuilding phase to that degree. Now, there's obviously not any surprises. Like I said, Calvary Chapel's had this because these programs have these like feeder system clubs, and that's one of the things that Temecula Valley was very good at. So, and Calvary Chapel also does that, and the Central Valley schools like Buchanan, Poway, they have these feeder systems. We consistently will see them at these off-season wrestling tournaments,
right, via the youth club, off-season youth clubs,
right, through USAA and to a lesser degree nowadays the AAU. But yeah, they have these feeder systems, and so what we may not have expected would be these feeder systems essentially going into overdrive during the pandemic. Because what else are these kids going to do? They're cramped. It's like they've been cramped up for the longest time, and so they want to do something. So if they get the opportunity and are going in there and working on it, it's like we may not have predicted this. So this is probably why we're seeing Palm Desert and Temecula Valley coming out of nowhere to become these like powerhouses. Like I said, Temecula Valley has always been consistent, but here they are. All of a sudden, they've been like going consistent. All of a sudden, are like jumping up all of a sudden. So this is very interesting to see, and it's going to see how this first, I'll just say first post lockdown, but this first post lockdown state tournament is going to go.
Right. This will be the first, true state tournament via post lockdown that the state of California will have. And so I want to kind of go back and see, now obviously what I've done is I've arranged this table based on how many of the team, how many wrestlers actually qualified for each team, and ranking them that way. And I did, of course, put their actual team placing to the left. So obviously you have Temecula Valley. They qualified the most, obviously, with 11. And then next up, the team with the second most was Calvary Chapel, who ended up taking third. And Palm Desert, even though they only got 8, they finished in second place, and there was only a 4-point difference between Temecula Valley and Palm Desert. And it shows by the fact that Palm Desert went 6 for 6 in the finals.
Yeah, that is something that helped Palm Desert, is that even though they're taking less teams, they've got clearly more guys going in there, and that might be what in the long term might edge them out, because these lower level placers for Temecula Valley, they might go, for example, 2 and out, or they might be out before the last day, whereas the Palm Desert guys could potentially. You just have to look at the results, and the results are that you've got 6 Masters champions, so they're going to go into the state tournament hungry, and they could very well, do something at the state tournament. But something else I'm going to point out too with Calvary Chapel, one thing that a lot of people have to remember: Dane Valdez, he is a product of John Azevedo's Calvary Chapel teams during the 90s. He is part of that dynasty. So he's essentially the embodiment of that state run. This might be his way of becoming not a state champion wrestler anymore, but a state champion coach. this is because he finished up in wrestling. He went to Oklahoma. He wrestled at the world stage. He established himself. And then what does he do? He comes back home. He which you don't see very often. He decided to come back home to Calvary Chapel and give back to the this little private school that no one had heard of in the sports community before
the run.
So it's very possible that we could see a generational revival in terms of the performance of Calvary Chapel under Dane Valdez.
And really, that run, when you consider it, that's no joke, because that was, I believe, 4 titles in that time frame.
No, that was it. I think it was like 6 or 7.
So
like they set a record that was only broken by one of the Clovis schools. I can't remember which one, but one of the Clovis schools back when the Valley started coming back.
Well, we'll have to make sure that we go back to it, because you and I both are pretty, how I say, attentive when it comes to details like that. So I'm sure that we'll be able to give our audiences something to look at when we are able to compile that data together. So I do want to actually look, though, because, hey, we've got these are our top 5 teams, that are going from the Southern Section into the tournament for this upcoming weekend. This on I believe it's going to be the 24th, 25th, and 26th of February, and it's going to be taking place in Bakersfield. They changed the name. It was Rabobank Arena. I will have to look up to see what they actually changed it to, because I guess new sponsor, and we know how that
sponsorships change all the time. The Staples Center just became the Crypto.com Center. So, and then we used to live down the street from the Arrowhead Pond. It's the Honda Center now.
So yes. So anyway, for those who are interested in going to the state tournament, it's going to be the Mechanics Bank Arena, and the state championships will take place from the 24th, 25th, and 26th of February, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday this week. And so if you want to go out and cheer your team, I would definitely try to get out there. We don't really have any dogs in the fight, but we do like to see how things go. We've been doing wrestling, since we were 10 and 12, and even though we're kind of out of the game, we still like to see how teams do and stuff. So,
well, I don't have any personal dogs in the fight, especially considering that Villa Park. I don't know if Villa Park even sent anybody, even though they did not.
No, your alma mater did not get anyone to the state tournament.
That's despite the fact that they had literally a historic run not too long. What was it? Last year before? They had a state finalist. That hadn't accomplished that before. Also of note, since I brought up my alma mater, is the fact that during the CIF duels phase, they actually qualified their girls wrestling team to the CIF duels tournament. That's well, yeah, it's women's wrestling has kind of been a little divisive, and so it's rather interesting because we'll just say that we know certain people who are not big fans of women's wrestling, but it's still been amazing to see it go from girls competing with guys. Like, I'll just throw out Victoria Anthony, who her senior year went on this historic CIF championship run to do something that no other woman had accomplished. And then you had Tatiana Padilla, who is now in the UFC, went on to win world championship and stuff like that, and she had to compete with the boys as well. So to me, it's just amazing how far it's gone, because remember, there was that year when there was a point where they had a women's state tournament, but it was a USA Wrestling sponsored event. So here it is, however many years later, we have actual women's wrestling, and my alma mater qualified for the CIF duels. To me, it's just mind blowing to where we've gotten to in that regard. And then, of course, we have women's wrestling, which is one of the women's. I forget what the program is in the NCAA, but they have a invitational in the NAIA. It's gotten pretty big.
Oh yes, and that's something that we'll have to cover definitely in another episode. But I know for a fact that women's participation in the sport of wrestling has exploded over the years, especially when states have been making it an actual sport. Now, the interesting thing is that all 50 states still don't have a women's state championships yet, but I think, and that may be just because of the fact that there is still a lack of participation or something to that effect, maybe because they don't have enough participation that they really can't sanction the sport, that it still might be in a developing phase. But so that's something definitely to cover in another episode in the future for sure.
I'm gonna point this out. I think there might actually be one or two states that actually don't have a wrestling championship at all. I might be wrong, but if all 50 states do sponsor men's wrestling championships, then it happened within the last decade. I think there's like one state that might be in either the Midwest or the South that does not sponsor wrestling. Like even Alaska sponsors wrestling.
Yes, because I remember there was, and I'll have to look this up, but I do know that there was a female participant several years back who she actually won the state tournament competing against the boys. Now, granted,
that was in North or South Carolina, I can't remember.
I think there was one in Alaska too, and I'll look it up to make sure, because what happened was, though, she basically, it was in the lightest weight class at the time, and I believe that she was a senior compared to, normally when you're in the lightest weight class in the boys, you're, to win state as a senior at the boys level, when you're in that growth phase is a little bit difficult. But again, we can look that up at another time.
I forget is the this just shows how far out of it I am. Is the lightest weight class 107 or 109 nowadays?
So currently, to my knowledge, it is 108.
Okay.
But I think that is with the 2 pound allowance. So I think it's actually, technically, it's 106.
Okay. Well, of course, probably about a decade ago, there was a high school realignment of the weight classes anyways, which threw things off a little bit. So,
well, and then here's something that will be interesting, is that the the NFHS, which is the National Federation of High Schools, they are the overseeing body of all high school sports. Now, they are going to give an option in the next couple of years to states, depending on their wrestling population, to either go with a 14 class system, a 13 class system, or a 12 weight class system. So the states will give the states the option to choose how many weight classes. Yes, this is going to be a thing. I have it in the NFHS rule book. And so, yes, states will be able to choose how many weight classes that they want to run for the season. Now, I would imagine, based on the fact that California is the most populous wrestling community in the nation, that they will stick with the 14 weight classes.
So would this be an option for like the states with smaller population sizes to like not
That's probably what they're going to do, because probably what you're seeing happen is that, depending on the state, that there probably isn't enough participants, to get into the postseason. That might be what is happening. Now, I don't know for sure, But I do know that, again, this is going to be a thing where states are going to be allowed to choose how many weight classes that they want to do for the season. So it'll be either 12, 13, or 14.
Well, I can tell you that I know for a fact that Missouri is not going to have a problem because so for those of our audience that don't know, I wrestled at Missouri Baptist University and I got to get a feel for the wrestling there. High school wrestling definitely doesn't have a problem. And in some ways, I'd say that the quality of wrestling there is actually probably higher than in California, but it's a different culture out there, and
well, and you have to consider some of the other states where wrestling is very much a big thing out there. For example, when you get into like the Oklahoma territories, you get into places where the Big Ten conference, in college rules over that area, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania is consistently one of the top states for wrestling, as well as, places like Ohio and Illinois and Oklahoma. So, you could probably imagine that those states will probably continue going with a 14 class system.
Yeah, let's be perfectly honest. California, while it has the largest state tournament and the largest number of participants, if you probably look at, for example, the percentage of participation is probably a little bit lower than those Midwestern states where wrestling is king. So where where you have these college level dynasties. So yeah, those states where wrestling is like a very key factor, those are going to be areas that are still going to maintain the 14 weight class system. I would imagine that the weight class to be eliminated is going to be dependent on the state weight classes, probably.
Yeah, and definitely that's again, as we keep talking and these topics keep turning up, that's more that we can discuss as we go along with this series. So just to kind of wrap up, where the southern section is, let me just go back to this real quick.
I would like to point something out with that top five. St. John Bosco, while they've been up there, realistically, St. John Bosco is more like it's more like a school that produces good individuals, like what are those brothers that went to Arizona?
The Valencia brothers.
The Valencia brothers. They have good individuals, but which is what puts them into state. But ultimately, I don't think they've really had the ability to develop a strong enough actual giant team in order to actually perform at state in terms of contention.
Well, and actually, let me kind of get into that. So I'm looking at the team scores from last year, and St. John Bosco was actually the highest placing team in the southern section. They took second at the 2020 state tournament. Now, granted, Buchanan ended up winning with the score of 261, while St. John Bosco ended up with a team score of 183.5 points. So the clear winner to that was Buchanan. But Bosco only ended up edging third place Poway by 1 point. So how many people they had in there? Well, obviously, we would have to go back and look at the brackets. But that's, a story for another time. But yes, you're right. Bosco has always had good individuals, and maybe that's, because of the fact that they're recruiting them or something. But, it seems that they will field a competitive team, but it's just that it's really those certain individuals that are really going to stand out.
Oh, yeah, we should probably bring up the fact that Bosco has, and isn't this a general frown upon, but they have a tendency to actually go out of their way to try to recruit wrestlers?
Well, probably. I don't know too much about their recruiting tactics, but
Like, I think that's what happened with the Valencias was that the coach went out of their way to essentially try to get them on scholarship because Bosco is a private school to get them in there. Whereas on the other hand, for like Calvary Chapel, they're a private school, but they home grow all their talent. So it's just one of those controversial things where I know that some people weren't exactly happy with them, getting the Valencias and stuff like that. Whereas, but then again, like for example, if we're going to talk about most school championships, with the exception of Calvary Chapel, they're all public schools.
yeah, good point to bring up here. So with that being said, though, I think overall, yeah, looks like the top performing school, from the last tournament, Bosco, they are still taking 8 wrestlers to state, and it looks like, but they placed 4th at the Masters. So we'll have to see how they're going to do. They did have one champion, obviously, as you can see here. And we'll just have to see how they're going to do. But again, so the 2 teams that are taking at least 10 plus wrestlers to state from the Southern section is going to be 3rd place Calvary Chapel and your winner, which is Temecula Valley. So with that being said, I just want to kind of cover some of the other schools or the other sections, to kind of see where we might be standing, with the teams for this upcoming year. So let me just kind of bring up my cheat sheet here to see where everyone is standing. So want to cover next the San Diego Masters. Now, this was a complete blowout, and you have Poway, and Poway qualified all 14 weight classes to state. 416 team points for Poway. 2nd place was nowhere close. Rancho Bernardo with 255.5 points. Rancho Bernardo did end up qualifying 10 to state, so they are one of those few teams this year that will get that. But Poway, my goodness, I was looking at the results. 14 finalists, 12 winners. Your breakdown of that.
Well, so here's the thing here's the big advantage that Poway has always had. They have been the big fish in the small pond that is the San Diego section. That's where they've always had the advantage, and that's why they've multiple times been able to take a full team to state, and why several times they've won it is because they just need to get out of that small pond in order to get into the bigger, essentially the lake that is the state tournament. And like I said, it has benefited them at times where they've been able to get, where at times they've been able to win the state tournament. But it's definitely to their advantage. But one thing that has to remember, like I said, they're the big fish in the small pond. If they were, for example, in like the Southern section, they may not be consistently qualifying 14 teams. Let's face it, no one qualified 14 teams out of the Southern section. So the whole idea that they're going out there, they're qualifying 14 people, blowing out everyone else, it's because of the fact that, like I said, they are the good team. Calling them the big fish in the small pond, now that might sound a little demeaning and might be downplaying their talent and accomplishments and stuff like that. It's not, though, because it just means that it's really more of a strategy. Now, like a lot of schools, they do have a feeder program going on in there, and so but they do have an advantage in that they're able to qualify more people because they have a shorter, easier way to the championship. So
I am looking, and Poway was ranked second in the state rankings before this weekend, obviously. So it sounds like that Poway was doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. Now, I am looking at Rancho Bernardo, who was the second place team in the San Diego Masters. And I will have to say that, you know what, they are no joke either, though, because they are ranked 20th within the state. And I think just having a ranking within the top 50, you know, on these rankings, I think is very respectable. It's just that I think Poway is just too much for them to be able to make a dent in Poway's mission, you know, which is trying to get back on top of that podium.
Yeah, and that is true. The fact that Poway is ranked number 2 in the state rankings, that just does just go to show that while they do, like I said, have an easier path to the state championship, they are no joke. So but what I'm saying is, like, on more of a downer year, it would be a little bit easier for them to be able to go and qualify more to the state championship. Like, I'd say that I've seen them qualify more at the more people to the state championship than any other school on a consistent basis, because of the fact that, like I said, there's a big fish in the small pond. So, and like I said, that doesn't take away from them. I mean, there's several, you know, for the metaphor, I mean, there's several species in nature that are a bigger fish in a smaller pond that can destroy anybody. So that's not downplaying them. They're clearly ranked well, but again, they did have a easier path to the championship. So we'll see how they do.
So I am looking at the 2020 results for both Poway and Rancho Bernardo, because it looks like they're the only ones that I can see that were made it into the top 20 from the San Diego section. Now, Poway obviously is as we noted a bit earlier, that they finished 1 point behind St. John Bosco for the final team standings at the 2020 tournament. So they took third. Rancho Bernardo, though, they did have a respectable finish at the 2020 tournament. They did rank 9th with 89 points. So, you know, kudos to them for getting that done. And we'll have to see if they can rank in the top 20 for the upcoming tournament. So with that being said, let's move on to the central section, one of the monster sections.
The snake pit.
Within the tournament. And
the snake pit.
There's just no getting around it. You know, these are the true powerhouses of the state. And, you know, and it's not just when you think about it, because first you've got Buchanan, who is ranked number 1, just to give you an idea of just the monsters. Again, like you're saying, this snake pit, it's just hell on earth to try and get out of this. You know, if you're not really at these schools, it's going to be really difficult to try and you know, be a winner. You got Buchanan, you've got Clovis High School, which technically this is Clovis South High School because there's 4 Clovises. And you have Clovis North, which has also been one of the dominant schools too. And you also have Bakersfield, which they might not be as powerful, but they have been a consistent, you know, player within that section as well. So when I'm looking at here, at least for this time around, Buchanan was actually trailing Clovis High School after the end of the first day at the Central Section Masters, because I was checking the results. But in the end, Buchanan came back to win the tournament. And I would have to say that this was closer probably than you would consider something like the San Diego section. Buchanan ended up with 442 team points versus Clovis High School, who finished second with 400.5 team points. Now, here's where I think the difference was. Buchanan did qualify all 14 weight classes to the state tournament, and 12 of those wrestlers were in the finals. But I think what ended up hurting Clovis High School, when I checked and looked at the results, they did end up losing one person. So they did not qualify one weight class to state. So they are only taking 13 compared to Buchanan. Now, when you look at the rankings here, Buchanan is the #1 team. They are the team to beat at this upcoming tournament. Clovis, though, they are ranked #5. And when you look at Clovis North was the 3rd place team. But unlike Clovis, aka Clovis South, Clovis North did qualify all 14 wrestlers to state. And then the last, very competitive team, which is Bakersfield, ranked 13th in the state prior to this weekend, and they qualified 12 to the state tournament, with Frontier High School rounding out the top 5, having qualified 7 to state and being ranked 19th before this weekend. So all in all, and again, when I'm looking at the 2020 state tournament, Buchanan, again, we mentioned that earlier, they were the winner. Clovis took 4th, and actually Selma High School was the next highest Central Section team that finished at the state tournament in 5th place, followed by Clovis North at 6th and Bakersfield at 8th. So last tournament, you had 5 teams in the top 10 from the Central Section, which would explain why, normally they are the ones that get the most. They get the most slots available for the state tournament, with the top 10 going, versus the Southern Section, which only gets 9. But again, these teams, Buchanan, Clovis North, Bakersfield, all teams getting, 12 plus wrestlers and being the powerhouses, being the major powerhouses that they are in the state. Matthew, what is your reaction to that? What do you think? What do you think that we have to look forward to for these teams going into the state tournament this upcoming weekend?
Well, one thing for people to understand, now at one point the Southern Section was the section that was getting the most representatives to the state tournament because of the quantity. The Southern Section is the most popular section in the state. The reason why nowadays the Central Section sends more people is because of quality. It's a quality over quantity thing. These are the schools that win the state championship on a regular basis. I think probably within the last decade, they've taken 8 or 9 out of the 10. They're just the better schools. Like I said, this is a snake pit. This is the place where the big boys come to play. This is the place where champions are made, where the guys who will go out and wrestle for other schools on full ride scholarships. This is where these guys are bred. So this is really not a surprise that the state favorite Buchanan is qualifying all of their people, and even like Clovis North came in 3rd. They're still taking all of their people. So, and if you look at most of the state championships are won by Clovis area schools. Clovis is West, Clovis North, Clovis East, Buchanan. These are all the teams. And even Bakersfield is known for its wrestling. They've won a few state championships, obviously not as consistently as the Clovis area schools, but still, this is the area. The Central Valley is the place where champions are born. If you're in the varsity lineup at a Central Section school, you have it pretty well made. You're most likely going to state. You're most likely placing in state. You're most likely going to be able to go to wrestle in college if you want to.
Well, and not just wrestle in college, but wrestle at a D1 program.
Probably, yeah.
Well, and because I think there was a time where we were seeing some wrestlers from Clovis and Buchanan. They were going to D1 powerhouses such as Penn State and some other places. So yes, these schools are going to be looked at, and the state tournament is definitely the place where it's an excellent scouting opportunity. And you can be sure that there's probably going to be a lot of schools out there that are going to be doing that, especially when it comes to D1, D2. Now, obviously, you'll get some D3 and NAIA in there too. And probably maybe some of the wrestlers that end up missing out, they could end up going to, the JC level or NJCAA level also.
Well, obviously, our joke is the fact that the guys who never made the varsity lineup in those schools are probably going to Fresno City, and are making a name for themselves there, because they're the guys who didn't make it, and they were perpetual junior varsity guys who, now they get their time to go to the Fresno City and win state championships there.
So I have to point out, especially when it comes to just the brutality of what it takes to just win the state tournament, and especially when it comes to winning the the masters level at in the central section. And you got to imagine, probably when there's a duel between Clovis and Buchanan. I remember a few years back when they had a duel, and they were streaming it on either Flow or somewhere. And the fact of the matter was that the tickets to go see it in person were sold out, and in order to actually be able to view it online, you had to pay to watch the stream, that just means that's how big these two schools are. And I can imagine that you're not just going to get some ref, some official who's been doing the officiating for maybe 5, 6, 7 years. You're probably going to get an NCAA level referee to officiate that match, because I can imagine that Buchanan and Clovis would probably be on par with, and it's probably above JC, maybe even more akin to a D3, D2 duel. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and one also has to remember is that, like I said, these schools are all within close proximity to each other. I don't know how many of them are in the same league, but they probably are. A few of them probably are in the same league.
I just cannot imagine. Can you imagine being in that league? Just that league alone, and you got to wonder how many that
It's a Killer's Row area. It's if you're in the Clovis area, you're in Killer's Row.
So, and actually, I'm looking at just the how dominant that it's been, because if you remember, Clovis itself had been going on this repeat of state championships for a number of years before Buchanan broke that streak. And I think it was something like a 4 or a 5-peat, if you recall. But now I'm looking, because 2015, Clovis was the school that took the state title. But from 2016 to 2020, it's been Buchanan. So Buchanan is currently on a 5-peat streak. So that means that, again, with their coming from behind and winning the Masters in the Central section, and then being ranked #1, so that means that it's their mission for this coming weekend to take that 6th consecutive title. What's your thoughts on that so far?
Well, they're a team on a mission, and of course, this is a strong rivalry. I have no idea how many times sucker punches are thrown or anything like that, but this is a very in-depth rivalry. These schools, I have no idea if they necessarily hate each other, but they definitely don't love each other. They're out for blood. They want the state title, and they will go out and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. Obviously, Clovis probably isn't happy with the fact that they aren't taking a full team. They're like, they're gonna go out there and they're gonna try to come back at Buchanan. The fact that they had to lose to Buchanan in the Masters tournament probably doesn't help them that much either. So again, these teams are going to go out there and they're going to fight tooth and nail. Anyone else is just in the way.
That's a very interesting way to look at that. So we'll have to definitely see. And again, you got Clovis North and Bakersfield. They'll be kind of there. But yeah, I think we'll be seeing the Buchanan. Buchanan is going to make sure that they are heard at this upcoming weekend for certain. So with that being said, to kind of close out some of the other sections that we have, I'm looking at. So you have your Central Coast section, which the winner of that was the current perennial powerhouse in that section, which is Gilroy. And you're very familiar with who's heading up Gilroy. But before we get into that, just to say they won their Central Coast Master section with 312.5 points. They qualified 11, the state, so they joined that club this year of 10 plus wrestlers to state. Second place was Los Gatos with 217 points, and they were one shy of a 10-member team to state, so they take 9. Rounding out third, fourth, and fifth, St. Francis, who are sending 6 to state, and Fremont and Palma were the fourth and fifth place finishers. And then also to kind of get into how Gilroy has done. They're currently ranked 8th before this weekend. So obviously, I think they really performed accordingly to that. And just seeing how they ended up doing at the 2020 tournament, where they took 7th with 127 points. So your thoughts on how Gilroy will be expected to be doing this weekend?
Well, one thing to remember is that Gilroy was the last non-central section team to win a state championship. Obviously, they're not expected to do as well this year, and their 11 might not seem that far behind, but it's very far behind when you're talking about the central section teams. So they might be able to go in there and do relatively well, but the fact of the matter is they're well removed from that state championship that they were able to pull off several years ago. So they might do pretty well, but we'll ultimately, I doubt that they're going to be able to usurp Buchanan. If anyone's going to usurp Buchanan, it's going to be Clovis.
Clovis High School, and then. Kind of wrapping up our major masters sections. So then you have the other major section within the state, and that is the Sacramento Joaquin section. Vacaville, who I believe has had a state championship in the past, but they're also a consistent finisher at the state tournaments. So they ended up winning that section with 341 points, and they did qualify 13 to state. So no joke there when it's coming to how they did. And I'm looking at their rankings. So they were 7th going into this state tournament. And then when I'm looking at how they did at the state championships back in 2020, they actually only finished 15th. So, and then we did have another team that did qualify more than 10 wrestlers out of that section, which is Oakdale. They finished 2nd place with 268 points. They qualified 11 to state. Now, if I'm looking at their state ranking, they're actually not far behind Vacaville. They are ranked 12th in the state. And if I'm looking at their final rankings, they actually finished ahead of Vacaville at the 2020 tournament by half a point. So what do you think about these two teams coming out of Sacramento Joaquin, Vacaville and Oakdale? Do you think that they're going to make some noise at all for this upcoming tournament?
Well, Vacaville's state championship, I think it was probably in the 2000s. So they're a little bit further away. I mean, this is probably even more of an idea of them being a bigger fish in the small pond, because Poway's been more consistent, but Vacaville, like I said, it's been a while since their state tournament, and I just don't see them making as much of a impact. If anyone, I think Gilroy would probably have more of a chance there. And I hate to point out and call these other teams bigger fish in small ponds, but that's kind of how it looks, and obviously it's played to their advantage. Like I said, Vacaville, Gilroy, Poway, they've all won state championships coming out of smaller sections, but I don't. They might do relatively well, but I don't see them pulling any kind of an upset.
All right. So with that being said, again, we are seeing that other states have had their state wrestling tournaments, and I think probably what we'll try to do is at the conclusion of the state tournament this upcoming weekend, we will try to have our next episode regarding high school wrestling in that sense. What we are hoping to do, at least for that, get that out there, and then from time to time, Matthew and I will try to release other episodes talking about things going on with MMA or things going on with sumo wrestling or international wrestling. So we'll be trying to get to those.
If anything, to bridge the gap, because let's face it, there are gaps in wrestling.
Oh yes, there's major gaps in wrestling here and there. So Matthew, thank you very much for coming on and giving your insight as to what we can expect going into this California high school state tournament coming up this weekend. So Matthew, just your closing thoughts. Who would you predict to be your top 3 teams for this upcoming tournament?
If I had to pick, it would probably be Buchanan, Clovis, and number 3 is kind of hard. I'm gonna say it's gonna be a toss-up between Clovis North, and I might be giving Temecula Valley too much credit, but I'm gonna say number 3 is either gonna be Clovis North or Temecula Valley.
All right. Well, we'll have to see if your predictions are going to be right for that. So thanks again for coming out, and to everyone. Hope that you enjoyed this episode. We're really going to try and keep things exciting to try and bring you some interesting takes on what we see going on in wrestling. And as you know, come in the upcoming weeks and the next month, that's when things are going to get really interesting, because that's when the NCAA tournaments, the NAIA tournament are going to start coming up. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to bring you some coverage and some opinions, previews, and reviews about that tournament. So once again, I am John, and this is Matthew from the Samurai Brothers Wrestling channel, and hope to see you next time. Signing out.